immediately for questions, for comments from any one of you. Anyone want to start? Are there roving microphones? Okay, you want to go?
Hi, Linda Nordling here. I'm a journalist. I would be interested in anyone's opinion, really, not just the speakers, but anyone's opinion about the thinking around creating Africa-specific indicators and the great, because I know, for instance, that Times Higher has been sniffing around and they want to create an Africa index. And I also know that there are Africa-based initiatives to do the same thing that seem to be moving a bit more slowly. And is there a strong need for an Africa-based index or ranking to be created in Africa, or is it okay if it's made by Times Higher? I just want to raise that as a topic.
Okay. Do you want to take up on that question?
Thank you, Chair. Eugene Kluter from Stellenbosch. The question that I asked the CEO of Times Higher Education is, why do they rank universities? And he couldn't actually answer me. In fact, he avoided to answer me. So that's my question. It's also my question. What do we want to achieve with that? Shouldn't we be setting out, like Nico indicated here, parameters of what actually makes a good university? The problem with the current international ranking systems is that they don't compare apples with apples. I'll give you just an example. So they look at the number of international staff that you employ at the university. So in South Africa we have a big transformation agenda in terms of appointing more black academic staff. So for every international colleague that we employ, we are actually undermining our own strategy as a country. The same goes for international students, and so forth and so forth. 40% is based purely on reputation. They also don't normalize the size of the budget of the university and relate that to the research output. If you think of what it costs to produce one paper, say at Harvard or Oxford or Cambridge, and you compare that with how we produce a paper with our budget, where those universities have a research budget which is equal to that of DST, they're pretty ineffective actually. In terms of their output. They should be producing a lot more if they were doing it with the same budget per publication as in South Africa. So I've got big reservations on why we should compare, why we should rank universities to start off with. We should develop indicators of a good university. That's the quality of your undergraduate programs in teaching and learning, the quality of the publications, the research that you produce, and the staff that you employ, and how that fits in with the strategy of a particular university. The system that you refer to, the multi-rank, is the way I think rankings should be moving, instead of just comparing all the universities in the world and not comparing apples with apples.
Okay, can I thanks you. Would you go to just ask to respond to the journalist? Who are you a journalist for?
So I'm the editor of Research Africa. I write for Nature and Science and a bunch of other people.
Okay, so you're a serious journalist.
No,
Can I just ask you, is there, or anyone, is there a place for an Africa-specific, ranking system with its own criteria, so it doesn't tend to be the whole
There
purpose?
was an initiative of the what was it, 2004 or thereabouts. Thank you. There was an initiative, and many of us commented. I'm sure that you had a chance to comment. In the Council of Higher Education, we commented on that, and the position that we took was that this is, if what we are going to do is a ranking in which you need to find who's number one, who's number two, and play at home, that's fine, you can do that. But if the rankings are about comparability internationally, then bite the bullet that you don't make the grade and decide that you're not going to play there and you're going to do something else. But it is, these things are about international knowledge production, basically, the things that they measure. So what is it that you're going to measure? unless you go the route that Nico has gone, which I think it is the only rational thing to do with the university in the continent. That's my perspective.
You know, my friend Robert Tyson has got a project on African quality.
African quality.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, and I recently said that there were some Dutch people from Leiden here. So I said, what would the Dutch do if Johan, Ton and I pitch up there one day and we say we're now going to come and investigate Dutch quality, considering that they didn't even qualify for the latest World Cup and they were nowhere. So I remember the Chinese wanted to get out of China. They wanted to be world class, whether we like the world class term or not. But I can't see what, in Africa, how are we going to, we're not in a world class competition at the moment. Our issue is how to improve our institutions for a start and make them more productive. And so, to me, I can't see the use of legal times.
Okay, I'm going to go beyond the speakers in a minute, but I just want to go to Zebulon quickly. Zebulon, something very interesting. I did a fundraiser with your VC in California recently, and so on the one hand, I hear you say Vince is reconsidering, for example, participation in the QS ranking system, etc., etc., etc. I hear every vice chancellor says, this is really good. But the moment they get out in front of the alumni, the moment they get out in front of the what's his name, they behave differently. So what I'm interested in, of course, that I've seen, what is driving this hypocrisy? On the one hand, saying we love that. On the other hand, working behind the scenes like crazy, calling in. I'm sure this doesn't happen, but I'm quite sure Cheryl might call in Stephanie and say, "What the hell? We just fell by so many points."
We don't fall.
So what I'm trying to sort of understand is, what is it in the mind of a manager, and I use that word deliberately in higher education, that participates rigorously behind the scenes while denying in sophisticated company that the rankings have any value?
Yeah, can I just maybe first answer?
You any order?
Yeah, the one that was raised by Linda with regards to Eugene, all the contestations that are raised, notwithstanding, including the one that is raised by Jonathan. Let's use football, FIFA, as an example. It's, Eugene and Nico use a lot of that. FIFA has got rules defined in Zurich by team, right? The rules of football. Now that no Central African team has broken into the quarterfinals, then we say, let's have rules that fit Africa, right? There are certain global rules. I haven't my background, I haven't had work in another global collaboration. Are they going to apply to the global matrix or not? So having African-centric rankings at a time when the world itself, the global knowledge, is experiencing rapid transformation in delivery, in the technologies that are going to spawn, that are going to be spawned out, we find ourselves totally marooned if you actually think you're going to do something that actually is contextually relevant when the entire fact is beyond our control, and we spoke about it earlier. That's my concern. You might as well not play FIFA World Football and have African FIFA and live with it. See, the number one in Africa. Right? So I think that to me is something like I've got serious contestations, despite my reservations about certain aspects of ranking. I think that is my point. So that is just in response to that. And I think probably, Jonathan, that is what drives the thesis. Whether we like it or not, you go to any website, University of Torino, University of Stockholm, they will mention we rank A, B, C, and D. Number 5 in the city, but number whatever in the world. And that determines funding agencies. How funding agencies, these big global funds, thank you, or they give you this, what's called this European thing, 2020. It is based on whether or not on that crude mismeasure of man, like reducing a human being to a single IQ score. But we cannot, whether we can change that is another story. I do have philosophical reservations, but that's the world we live in. It's my real politic view of it.
Yeah, you're not alone. Professor Davis. I'll come to the left in a minute, if you know what I mean.
Is there a microphone? I'll try to speak. Essentially, what the trouble I have is that let's just focus a little bit on teaching and learning. Because you've just heard somebody say the whole thing is knowledge production. It's not. It's teaching and learning, which is the transmission of knowledge and the education of students. Now, to me, the context of how teaching and learning occurs in a particular university, in a particular country, is so different that I don't know how any of the methodologies that Robert described can apply to two countries. Let me compare. In South Africa, the school-leaving population, as we all know, is in a situation which is not comparable with the school-leaving population in, let's say, Germany. So therefore, how the task of educating classrooms of undergraduates is completely different. If you take policy, and it was notorious, for example, that in Italy, medical education was based on massification. They took 200,000 first-year medical students at the University of Rome alone. They failed 90% of them in the first year, and then the rest proceeded in a normal sort of way. Now, that's very different from a university that has a very elite cutoff point as to what it admits, and then produce a throughput of 95%. So therefore, I don't know how these decontextualized surveys, I mean, I would, as a scholar, I would say that Robert has to tell us, I mean, the transparency issue is so gross to a scholar that the surveys, they base it on surveys. Who is being surveyed? Are they in-country surveys or are they international surveys? And so on. Let's take another example from my own ken, that is South African medical graduates were renowned for their quality, which was internationally and everywhere and in South Africa, because the curriculum taught them to be practically useful and effective. German medical students had never done a single procedure when they graduated. They would come streaming to South Africa to do electives here to learn how to stitch a patient or to give, to put up a drip. So therefore, how can you compare the quality of undergraduate education in Germany versus South Africa? And so I challenge as a scholar that the methodology here is so suspect and so problematic that we literally cannot really work with that kind of thing. And the teaching and learning is so important, but it has to have its own special way of being measured. And the focus has to be on that in a country in Africa particularly, because the knowledge production will follow. If your teaching and learning is done effectively, you will have the population of graduate students and you will have the high flyers coming after that. The whole thing depends on the teaching and learning component. That is, in our context, what universities are about.
Can I just add something here? As somebody who's tried to capture quality in teaching all my life since I was a government student, it is such an incredibly complex thing, trying to describe good teaching, that to reduce it to the lecturer-student ratio, to me, it is highly offensive. You're not making what a Sandler can do with 300 kids, in a class in philosophy, where it really doesn't matter because of his expertise in Socratic teaching. And so to reduce all of this, what is good teaching to ratios is for me so incredibly ridiculous, even though I understand it logically easy to do. Everyone on this side, Stephanie, and then Evans.
Thank you. Stephanie Burton, I'm the DVC for Research at the University of Pretoria. I want to raise what might sound like a very pragmatic point. I hear the intellectual arguments around all of the discussion we've had today, but I want to say thank you to Liz for her contribution, which was much less technical. But you have to realize that we as university executives and certainly our vice chancellors are asked all the time when they go out there on their fundraising trips or out into the stakeholder arena. They are asked about the rankings. They are asked where do you stand and why and what are you doing and what does it mean. And I think one of the most important things that we should be doing about the rankings is understanding them enough to explain them to our stakeholders. Because the stakeholders will misinterpret if we are not understood when we talk about it. And those stakeholders range from the mother of a first-year student who comes in and says, is this the best university for my child to study history or medicine or whatever it is, up to the global major funding organizations who may be looking to invest in a network of universities in our region. And they all need to understand what those rankings mean. And we have a huge responsibility to explain that.
And you think you can win that?
Well, I don't think we should walk away. I really don't think we should walk away from it.
Okay.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to follow on what Virant and to a certain extent Liz said about the importance of teaching and learning. I've just retired from UCT. I spent the last 5 years as a champion of pushing internationalization and the increasing research. But it seems to me that the sort of the obsession, at least with research at UCT and other universities, to a certain extent misplaced. Among the DVC at UCT, it's well known that the most important in terms of the institution's objectives among the DVCs is research and internationalization. I think that is a mistake. They have ignored teaching and learning. Here they are sort of, they keep saying we've got to keep improving, and Caroline, my former colleague here, is responsible for that. In fact, she has got the title of manager, I think, for international visibility or something. And yet, the only thing that UCT boasts about is academic development program, which essentially is an attempt to remedy what the school system has failed South Africa. And they sort of they are proud about that. They haven't paid enough attention to teaching and learning portfolio, which is the most important, should be the most important portfolio. Why? Because all these research pretensions they keep driving are not going to come to anything unless they kind of produce the kind of students who are going to succeed. UCT, as everybody knows, and I suppose to a certain extent Vince and Stellenbosch as well, the A-rated researchers, and I speak on this as one was got, I suppose, the credible research pretensions as a rated researcher. You know, sort of, they are aging. They need to diversify that cohort. They need to have successors that, in terms of who are going to carry the work. And in terms of I'll go and the sort of, I suppose, dig at my own faculty, the Faculty of Law. The Faculty of Law at UCT prides itself, and in fact it ranks better than the university, the UCT, in terms of world rankings. And yet, if you look at the kind of throughput transformation, they have failed on that, and they have been caught on that. My sense is that this should not be about simply being obsessed with rankings. Rankings and research outputs are important in the kind of knowledge world we live in now, but they must be about producing the kind of graduate that will add value. I'll stop very soon.
Please.
Compare the lot of the problem. A lot of things went wrong and they are still going wrong. But one thing in terms of production of researchers that succeeded, and I've pleaded with successive vice chancellors at UCT to learn an example from there, is that they were able to produce world class. And when I say world class, scholars that are not in those countries, and this is Jonathan, that's the problem, that you go to Mozambique and there are no educators you can talk to. They are all over the place, but they succeeded in producing those people by focusing on teaching and learning. So teaching and learning is the key even to this research rankings.
Okay, thank you, sir. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you very much. I'm Rufino Kaswanawafia, GBC Research Innovation, Northwest University. Mine is a moral, ethical dilemma when it comes to this ranking system issue. What is the relationship between ranking and resourcefulness? Is it a matter of universities with more doing more? If all things were equal, would that still be the case? And therefore, for me, it really becomes a moral, ethical issue that may either even detract universities that are putting an effort, from even going that route. So I just think that we need to look at it more holistically. It's good to be in a competitive world, in a global world, to grow, to challenge yourself, but it's important equally to look at contextual issues and also where a country like South Africa is coming from. So actually, it also becomes an emotional issue.
Yeah, can I ask, does our politics screw us? In other words, Singapore is the #1 university in the rankings in Asia, right? But they have an authoritarian political system in which they don't tolerate this kind of nonsense, that we do around, and they improve. They're #1 in science and math achievement in the school system. Sarah would have to help me there if I'm mistaking that. But they have a political system in which you don't have these debates, about how many international faculty should we have versus local faculty because of employment equity and Department of Labor. I'm just wondering with respect, I'm with Zebra here. The reason we play against India and we get beaten badly, the one day series, my view is you're never going to know how good you are until you play against India. Do you know what I'm saying? You can play against Bangladesh and Zimbabwe, but that doesn't tell you how good you are. I don't know if this sporting analogy is going too far, but anyone else? Greta.
Rita Winfield from the University of Pretoria. I think the one thing that's not being talked about is that these rating systems are using metrics that are available, and are they not just a proxy? We don't talk passionately about teaching and learning. Yes, that's incredibly important, but it's really, really difficult to measure. But you can measure what one of the outputs is of teaching and learning at the end of the day, and that's a damn good research system. So these metrics are measuring a proxy of what we all want. But I think the one thing that we need to think about is they're just metrics. And that as a country, as a continent, we can't just sit back and let other people measure us. We have to measure ourselves. And I think that was said really rather nicely about the Shanghai list, or which is now what they are, WU, whatever it is. The vision was that they wanted to put in place universities that would produce Nobel Prize winners. And should that not be what we should be trying to do in 100 years' time? We should be having a system that has excellent teaching and learning, excellent research, and let's produce some Nobel Prizes.
Okay, John, you mustn't think I'm going to let you sit there as an expert in this area and not say anything that can add value to this discussion. So if you don't mind me answering on you.
You mean now?
Yeah.
Well, let me make two comments. One is that I think that the view that Nico put out at the end there is my own position, that we have to distinguish between ranking systems that have, as Robert has indicated, a lot of other people have a lot of negative aspects. Part of the reason why I find them less than helpful simply is at the methodological level. I think that a number of people have said that the underlying data is unreliable, that they have major methodological weaknesses. You're comparing apples and pears, they decontextualize, you can add up all of these things. And I hear what you're saying is, why is it that if so many of us know that these ranking systems are not particularly robust or accurate of high quality, why do VCs and other, but those are two different discourses. We have to understand that things that managers do and vice chancellors do for purposes of symbolism and prestige, that's another narrative. It has another set of rules of game. But we mustn't confuse the two to think that if you play that game, that you necessarily agree to the rules of the other game. So that's, we live with a lot of cognitive dissonance, Jonathan, in this country, that and institutions. And managers are probably have to be more schizophrenic than the rest of us. So that's the one point. The other point is that there's a huge difference between a commitment to rankings and a commitment to measuring research, teaching, learner performance, if it's properly done. And this is the point that we have to say. I agree that we have to understand and have to agree what kind of institutions do we want to be, do we want to manage. And the mission, the purpose, and the goal of these institutions must determine what are the areas that we want to measure. And measurement is fraught with difficulties. Of course, Brenda is correct. Pretty much every indicator of a university system is a proxy. But that is true of so many other things. When we measure the health of the health system or the educational system, we use proxies. Short of that, there are no direct measures of many things that we measure in the social system. But that doesn't mean that we don't know which are better measures, which are worse measures. So my own view, in short, not so short, is that you have, if you want to use indicators of different domains of a university's workings, then that's a good way to do it, and it can actually feed into strategic planning and decision making. I am not at all convinced that any manager learns from a ranking system anything about how to strategically plan, allocate resources, or direct the university in the future.
Okay. Let me just throw out this question again to many of you here. So Liz and I worked together for a number of years, and we obviously discussed the rankings and so on and so forth, back and forth. One of the views that I had was that the criticisms of these global ranking systems are very valid in many ways. On the other hand, they do give you useful indicators against which to measure yourself, not for the purpose of comparing yourself, with the elite universities of the world, but to look at the gaps in your own system. What are the areas in which you can improve, given the measures, and here I'm with Zebulon. Most of you use the phrase whether we like it or not, and we are engaged in this game whether we like it or not. And what can you learn from a ranking system in order to improve your own systems? The University of the Free State is in the middle of everything, the middle of the country, the middle of, whatever constructed hierarchy, and it will probably be there for a long time. But it has a lot to learn from these different systems that can improve teaching and learning, research, and so on and so forth. The other thing we haven't talked about, of course, is the shortcuts people take in order to position themselves well in this ranking system. I suppose our local version is these predatory journals, and every now and again I see an email that scares the hell out of me, about how people try to take shortcuts, publishing their own journals in which they're the editors and so on and so forth. Here's a massive downside that can make you look good on paper, but in fact compromises other kinds of things that are important in the academy. Any views on any of those issues? Liz?
I think that one of the issues that happen in that regard is that if one wants to really compete in the rankings, one has to make a massive investment. One of the things that I found very, very sobering was when the University of the Free State participated in one of these Commonwealth benchmarking exercises. And we were paired with a number of other universities, and those universities had an entire team whose only occupation was to measure, to watch, to prepare actually for the submission for the rankings. I mean, I thought I was stressed until I walked into that room and I saw what these people were doing. And that means that that money gets locked into that and could go into some of the things that William is saying. So you know, it requires a decision to do that. Taking them as parameters, as something that one would like, why can we not produce Nobel Prizes? And absolutely, why not? But decide to play the full game requires an investment that I don't think that any university in the country, from the University of Cape Town downwards in the rankings, anybody could afford, frankly. If I was asked for my vice chancellors, should we do this? I said, for heaven's sake, don't. We have other things to do.
Yeah, but isn't there a danger in this? I mean, I hear you, and I'm going to be giving a talk here in a few weeks' time on the centre-periphery debate, which I actually found quite, ridiculous to apply today in a world in which knowledge systems are so incredibly integrated. We do produce Nobel Prize winners, but the guys leave the country. Okay, and then they get the Nobel, like the guy we just brought out from Pretoria Boys, who shares a Nobel Prize in chemistry. So I want to know why that happens. So you see, when Wieland has his farewell the other day, one of his many farewells at UCT, science doesn't make me emotional, it intrigues me, but I got very, very emotional because the person representing him, or giving a tribute, I think he was from Cambridge, he puts up on a screen one of Wieland's first papers, okay? And I had goosebumps because here is W. Gebers next to H. Krebs. And I said, shit, I would give a limb next to be this person won the Nobel Prize in cellular biology or something like that. That's my point. Wieland works in the best labs in the world. He then comes back to South Africa, shares that knowledge, creates his own centers. That world makes more sense to me than a hardline critique of the capitalist system of knowledge production on its own. But I'm sure you're going to take me on that.
I do not think that the one sort of belies the other. I think that you can have a hard critique because you must not walk into this with your eyes closed. You walk into this with your eyes wide open.
Sure.
This is the manner in which the world works. This is the manner in which knowledge production works, is measured, is etc. And then you do the best you can in order to keep your ethics. And B, to achieve actual quality. I wish we could produce something more than Nobel Prizes that win for Peace Prize. That is relatively easy to do. We need the other ones. And I think that all investment has to go there. But that does not mean that you need to invest in moving from level X to level Y of the rankings. That means that you need to get the Nobel Prizes. Where you get into rankings or not is another story.
Yeah.
That's the issue.
Yeah, I did. Bonnie, was this a debate at UNISA? I'm sort of curious about your response.
No, what I'm interested in is rather different. Because it just seems to me that no scholar engages in research in order to become a Nobel Prize winner. They engage in research because they're curious about the substance of discovering knowledge. Then it gets discovered for a particular purpose. It therefore seems to me that the essence of a university is not so that it compares with another university, but it's so that it actually does the work of a university in the circumstances that it exists in the most exciting and meaningful way. And what am I saying? I'm saying that essentially it seems to me that the idea of rankings is the end point. A lot has been put into the process of knowledge discovery and production and learning. Because when we talk about the ranking, we are not putting in all that has gone into and all the diversities and the divergences that have gone into it. We look just simply at the end product. And therefore, I, like others, I do ask the question, whether in fact in the higher education system, the idea of ranking in itself is important and meaningful. Because the learning and the knowledge process is so, it goes through a whole series of steps. You can't just determine at the end what you see at the end without really taking account of where it has been. That really is for me the concern.
I want to go back to Robert's first point. Robert, I'd like you to respond, if you don't mind, to what you heard here as our international guest. But just before I do that, one of your criticisms that I thought was very powerful has to do with mission. What is the mission of an institution, and can it be distorted by this sort of blind participation? I just remember that with the I think it's the Newsweek ranking of universities in the US, one institution that I know quite well plays this game, and that is to really get to the top. You've got to make sure that you are so selective in the undergraduate population that you, so for example, right now, I think this university boasts about only taking 4.2% of applicants, and that's good in terms of the ranking. If you have that kind of reasoning in a country like South Africa, just to go back to the previous point, it's not only unethical, it's just wrong, you know, on so many different levels. But that's the part of the game that, of course, is so unattractive. But do you want to give us a sense of what you heard?
Just a couple of remarks, actually, about rankings in general, and perhaps in passing I'll touch on some of the issues some of you raised. First of all, the whole idea of having a specific ranking for Africa, the ranking system where I'm involved, have considered that, not only for Africa, but for all continents. And as I've showed you, you can see that the other global ranking systems have picked up on the idea. They have sort of now a whole series, a whole family of differentiated rankings. But the problem there is they apply the same indicators to each and every continent, to each and every geographical zone. And my thinking has been to, again, try to differentiate and to develop indicators or modify indicators that touch on specific issues. For example, in the case of Africa, and this is probably what Nico was referring to, I'm not here to judge African quality as Nico said. This is part of my thinking that research excellence and research quality should be contextualized. Quality means something different in the African context than, say, in the US. And the whole idea of this project is actually, and we've run a survey actually amongst African scholars, how do they perceive quality? How do they perceive research excellence? And what can we learn from those responses in developing or modifying performance indicators? So we are putting some time and effort into this idea of contextualizing, regionalizing notions that sort of underline quality judgments in research mainly, but also in other dimensions like teaching and learning, internationalization. All of this runs counter to what I think Liz said, this idea of globalization, higher education. True, that's also going on, but at the same time, even in Europe, we see a counter movement of regionalization, localization. And I think that's equally important to take that movement aboard on how you customize, how you think about performance indicators that really go to the heart of what your university is all about. And although we do have global universities, they are a minute share of all the universities of higher education we have in the world. Most of them are highly localized, highly regionalized, and that is not simply picked up ranking systems, and that is where we still need to make a lot of progress, and there are many possibilities there actually. And just to give you one example, I'm part of an expert panel funded by the European Commission, and the European Commission is hopefully planning to spend a lot more money on regional innovation systems in Europe to build up, to expand regional knowledge economies. So what we've developed now, the report was published a couple of weeks ago, is a new way of looking at universities and specifically the regional impact, innovation impact created by these universities. And we've developed a whole range of indicators, and the whole idea is not to use these indicators as a sort of a deterministic or mechanistic ranking system, but to use this as a way to engage in a discourse with the universities, with the stakeholders, on how they perceive themselves within the region and how they would like to move along in terms of creating more or more effective impacts. So the whole notion we are now sort of developing is not a ranking, but a narrative with numbers. And I think that is also the future for rankings, more sophisticated rankings. They produce the numbers, but it's up to us, or stakeholders, to produce the narrative. And I think that is still something we have to think about more clearly. What kind of narratives would we like to have? How should we develop them? And to which audiences or which stakeholders should these narratives speak? So I see not the rankings as an end point, but as a starting point to build on that, to use it as a platform, as a way of interacting, engaging with a whole range of stakeholder communities, and also the academics themselves. Because I know, being an academic myself, that I don't feel well represented by rankings, by any ranking. So even within the universities, within the university administrative systems, I can see a lot more opportunities for collecting more fine-grained, more customized information that also does credit to the wide range of activities of academics. Not only teaching and training, but the whole wide range we're now engaging with. Think of social media. There isn't one ranking system that includes information on social media, on tweeting and what have you. So there's a lot more opportunities out there, and I'm pretty sure we will get there because the digitalization of society is moving on, and we will over the years see many more information sources that we could use for this kind of upgrading or extending of university ranking systems.
Thank you. For those of you who don't know Sarah Howie, she is the colleague who led the PIL study in South Africa, the Progress in Reading and Literacy, that unfortunately showed that almost 8 out of 10 kids in South Africa cannot read for comprehension in grade 4. So Sarah's done amazing work on international comparative studies of achievement, albeit in the school sector. Sarah, you wanted to speak?
Thank you. Jonathan just saved me the caveat that I was about to start with, which is that I'm far more familiar with the ranking systems of schooling systems than the intricacies of the current systems of rankings. However, what I have read and seen led me to be quite concerned, particularly along the lines of what Johanna Ton raised, and that is in terms of methodology, in terms of the indicators, the weightings, the compilation of some of those indicators at an initial look appear to be problematic. So one of the issues that I see currently is the sustainability of the rankings in their current form. I don't see them being sustainable in their current form in terms of the critique that's mounting internationally from academics around the composition of those indicators. That has to change. I would say within the relatively short term, the methodologies that have developed in other ranking systems will surely impact on the way that we measure these world rankings. I agree they're probably here to stay in some form or other, but one of the concerns I have, other than the methodological composition of the indicators, is simply the unintended consequences that we see already, and I believe will increase unless we bring in some kind of accountability systems to counter that. And by that, amongst the predatory journals, but also the behavior of colleagues, the lack of collegiality that I see starting to increase in certain quarters, the exclusion of both staff and students, and I think that's well recorded and noted in the current Global Monitoring Report that's just been released in 2018. I think there are a number of unintended consequences that while we go in with our eyes open, we have to be very, I think, vigilant in terms of those, particularly for the management, because we may be seen to be creeping up the rankings in certain quarters, but whether or not that is down to the hard work and the quality is a big question that I have, and it's led to the proliferation of all sorts of inadequate work, I would say, for want of a better word. So poor quality work, certainly the quantity is coming out, and when we have metrics that value quantity over quality, I think that's highly problematic. So I think those unintended consequences are something that we'd have to keep our eye on.
Thank you. Terry, I've never seen you sit through a long meeting without making a contribution, so I'll have to come to you.
Carolyn Newton from UCT. The pressure on executives has been mentioned, and I think what we have to recognize is that a lot of that pressure comes from the public, whether it's in the form of parents, as Stephanie mentioned, from alumni, from potential donors. And so I think we have a lot more work to do to educate the public about where rankings are problematic. We have these discussions amongst ourselves all the time. I'm not underestimating the difficulty of that, because part of what we do is try to understand them and then put out press releases, and the media, with the noble exception of my colleague Linda here, do not want to engage with complex narratives. They want a very simple story. And even trying to get them to relay the message that rankings are relative is difficult. But I think that's something that we all need to do, engage in. Following on from Stephanie's point, really, that I think is really important.
Thank you. Robert, can I ask you a difficult question? Because everybody's been polite towards you, and Liz's point, which is a very, very important point given the politics of South Africa, is that what these rankings do, perhaps an unintended consequence, is to restate, and to almost remind African universities of their lower status, of the inequality between themselves and the West. And it is done with such a sort of enthusiasm on the part of the well-resourced universities in the north of the world system. It's almost as if colonialism didn't happen. It's almost as if, to quote Walter Rodney, Europe didn't underdevelop Africa, for specific purposes. Are you conscious of that in your enthusiasm for, or at least your work on rankings, that this in fact reproduces and reminds people about the place, if you will, in the world system?
Yeah, well...
And by the way, it was just before you speak, there is a local version of that as well. So I would find it completely unacceptable to compare in a national ranking the University of Venda against the University of... I mean, it's as if the homeland system didn't happen. It's as if apartheid didn't happen and so on. So there are other versions of this.
Yeah, well, that is of course a tough question, and personally I've never actually looked at it from this particular point of view. From a personal experience, I really can't judge how people look upon the rankings in this type of setting. Probably, to cut it short, they will see that's Africa, these are developing countries or even third world countries, lower income economies. We're not surprised that the universities are not high up in the rankings. That is the common response, and rightly so, because I think Liz said rankings, high-ranked universities, that's all about investment. It's all about resource availability. And again, I'm sort of talking towards the future here. We are experimenting with different kinds of rankings where we normalize according to available budgets, available expenditures, student numbers. And if you start correcting for size or for resource availability, you see huge shifts in the rankings. All of a sudden, universities from, say, lower or middle income countries run up the rankings because with the limited resources they have, they are relatively efficient. So the trick here actually is not to think in terms of the traditional rankings, but to think in terms of size corrected or resource normalized rankings. And then I promise you will see huge differences. And in some cases, particularly in South Africa, I can't give you details, you will see some universities moving up the rankings quite significantly. So it's not only about the mindset, as you suggest, it's also about It's also about technology and the availability of information that allow us to correct for these differences of perception, if you will. And like I said, this again is the rankings of the future will start normalizing for resources, and you will see quite different kinds of rankings where the apples are compared with the apples and the pears with the pears. And you will see Harvard dropping down because there's no fair comparison with a university like Harvard with such huge resources. So they are in a category of their own. And we have to start taking these things seriously and incorporating them in this next generation of rankings.
Thank you, Robert. We have reached 7 o'clock. I think my role is, in closing, is to thank our speakers. Could you give our 4 then Johan, on behalf of ASSAF and Roseanne, thank you very much for these spectacular facilities. I would push up your ranking just on the basis of these incredible facilities, so thank you for sharing that with us. And for each of the speakers, there is a special gift. I hope you appreciate it, since it's a bottle of water. To you, and I believe, is that correct? Refreshments are served behind us. Thank you, everyone.
On journey.